There is a scene in the film Bohemian Rhapsody that almost everyone remembers. Queen are about to walk on stage at Live Aid. Their manager slips behind the mixing desk, reaches for the controls, and pushes the volume past the limit. It is a wonderful moment. It is also not what happened. The man at that desk was not their manager, and he did not turn Queen up. According to the company that supplied the sound, he turned them down. To understand why, you have to understand what Wembley Stadium actually sounded like on the 13th of July, 1985. Live Aid was not a normal concert. It was more than 60 acts, moving on and off one stage on a schedule measured in seconds. There was no time to reset anything between bands. Every act shared the same public address system, the same speakers, the same amplifiers, the same limits. Whatever the last band left behind, the next band inherited. The system itself had barely been tested. Power problems during the days of setup meant the sound rig was never properly checked on its own. The crew running it could only confirm that audio was passing through during a handful of other artists' line checks. That is not a sound check. That is a pulse check. A delay tower had to be added and powered up on the Saturday morning, hours before the first act. Nobody knew what the system would really do until people started playing through it. There was a further problem, and it was a strange one. Large decorative screens had been painted with emulsion and hung around the stage. Paint is not acoustically transparent. Sound hit those screens and lost its top end, its clarity, the frequencies that let you hear words instead of noise. To compensate, the engineers had to drive the high frequencies of the system almost flat out. Before a single band had played, the sound rig was already working near its ceiling. Now think about what most acts did with a 20-minute slot on a system like that. They arrived, they plugged in, and they pushed. Every engineer wanted their band to be the loudest thing anyone heard that day. It is a completely natural instinct. But a sound system is not a volume knob that keeps going. Past a certain point, you are not making more sound. You are making the same sound dirtier. That point has a name. Engineers call it overloading, and it is what happens when you ask a system for more than it can cleanly give. The result is not power. The result is mush. The bass stops being a note and becomes a rumble. Vocals lose their edges. A stadium full of people stops hearing a song and starts hearing weather. And on that afternoon, according to the people running the sound, act after act was doing exactly this. Hours of it, stacking up, band after band, each one adding its own layer of strain to a system that had never been allowed to rest. Nobody had planned it that way. There was no memo telling every band to hold back, no shared understanding that the system needed protecting. Each act simply had 20 minutes, a stage they would never see again, and every reason in the world to leave nothing behind. That is the trap. A 20-minute slot in front of a billion people is the one situation almost guaranteed to make a good engineer do the wrong thing. Queen did something different, and it started before they ever reached the stage. They had no sound check. Nobody did. So they sent their own front-of-house engineer, a man called Khalaf, to go and study the system in advance. Brian May described it plainly years later. They did not have a sound check, he said, but they sent their brilliant engineer to check the system, and he set all the limiters for them. That word matters, limiters. A limiter is not the same thing as a volume control. A volume control simply makes a signal bigger or smaller. A limiter watches the signal constantly and stops it from crossing a line, no matter how hard it is pushed from behind. Set a limiter too high and you protect nothing, the system overloads anyway. Set it too low and you strangle the sound before it ever reaches the crowd. Getting it right requires knowing exactly what the specific speakers, the specific amplifiers, and the specific room can actually take. Khalaf did not remove the limiters. He did not leave them on some factory default. He set them deliberately for this system on this day, with numbers he had gone and worked out for himself. Roy Clare, whose company supplied Queen's sound, put the correction bluntly. Khalaf did the opposite of what the movie said, he explained. The movie said he turned the volume up. He actually pulled it down because everyone was overloading the system. Pulled it down. On the biggest stage in the world with 1 billion people watching, Queen's engineer made them quieter than he could have. And here is the part that sounds impossible until you understand it. Pulling it down is what made them sound louder. A system running below its ceiling has headroom. Nothing is clipping, nothing is smearing, the bass stays a note and the voice keeps its edges. Every hit lands as a separate, clean event instead of dissolving into the wall of noise the acts before them had left behind. Brian May's own summary of the result is 4 words. We were louder than anyone else. They were not louder, they were clearer. But to 150,000 people in a stadium, and to 1 billion people watching at home on television sets that could not reproduce a tenth of what was actually happening in that field, clear is what loud feels like. Every other act that day was fighting the same overloaded system and losing a little more of itself with every song. Queen were the only ones who had sent someone to go and ask the system what it could actually do, and then respected the answer. 60 music industry insiders were later polled on the greatest live performance in rock history. They chose those 20 minutes. Part of the reason is something almost nobody in that stadium could have named at the time. There is a footnote worth adding here. None of this shows up on the recording most people watch. A microphone close to the stage does not capture stadium acoustics. It captures a clean feed built for broadcast. The difference Khalaf made was not something a home viewer could hear. It was something 150,000 people standing in that field could feel in the difference between a song and a wall of sound. So why does the film tell it the other way? Because the myth is a better scene. A man sneaks to a desk, breaks a rule, pushes past the limit, and greatness follows a few seconds later. It takes 2 seconds to understand, and it feels like rebellion. It is worth saying plainly that this is how most rock history gets flattened. A single dramatic gesture stands in for weeks of unglamorous preparation nobody filmed. The audience remembers the hand on the fader. Almost nobody remembers the engineer who spent the morning alone in an empty stadium, working out what a speaker stack could survive. The truth took longer to tell, and for years it barely got told at all. The film came out in 2018. The correction from the people who had actually been there came afterward, in interviews almost nobody watched compared to the tens of millions who saw the scene. Search for that scene online today, and you will still find people asking the same question. Did that actually happen? Did someone really turn the sound past the limit and get away with it? The question keeps getting asked because the scene is more memorable than the answer. The real answer was sitting the whole time in an interview with the one company that had actually built the system Queen played through, patiently correcting a detail almost nobody thought to check. A band with no sound check sent an expert to go and understand a machine, and he used that knowledge to hold back exactly as much as the room required. One of those is a good scene, the other is why it actually worked.